Welcome to the Life with Grief podcast. I'm your host, grief and soul purpose coach and fellow griever, Tara Accardo. Welcome back to the Life with Grief podcast, the podcast where we do not shy away from the tough stuff. I'm your host, Tara Accardo, and I am here to be your guide of sorts and walk beside you as you navigate the often messy and chaotic terrain of grief and healing. Today's episode is a big one. It is all about coping with anger within our grief. So this could be the kind of anger that just simmers, or this could be the full-on fist clenching, pillow punching, why did this happen kind of rage and anger that so many of us feel after a loss. And let me just start by saying that if you are angry, you are not broken, you are not dysfunctional, you are not a messed up person, you are human. You may feel an injustice has been done in some way, shape, or form, or you are just trying to understand and reason with that now. And wherever you are on this spectrum, I want to honor you today. I want to witness you and hold space for you and your anger, and I want you to know that it's okay. But I also want to challenge you here a little bit today, as I always do in a very loving sort of way, to join me in talking about ways that we can properly cope with this anger so it doesn't take over our whole life, so it doesn't overwhelm us and just overcome every little nook and cranny, because we might be feeling this anger and we might be really into it right now and we just need to lean into that a little bit. But I think for so many people, as they're grieving, they actually don't want to be as angry as they are. A lot of the people I coach and a lot of grievers that I have come across in my time of being a grief coach, they don't want to harbor this anger. They don't want to carry it with them. They want to be happy and joyful, and they don't want to hold on to this resentment. But it is so much easier said than done to let that go. And my friend, trust me, I have been there myself in my own way. I want to honor wherever you are today. And in saying that, let's get into it. But I also just I always feel like I need to preface these conversations when we're addressing big emotions here on the podcast that we can only address so much in one episode. So there might be more on anger to come, but recently we've done some other episodes on disenfranchised grief, and we've talked about anticipatory grief and just these big, important griefy topics here on the podcast before. I know you guys like these episodes and find them useful, and this one on anger has been on my heart and mind for a long time to address. So it felt like it was time, and it's a really big, daunting one to dig into. So we're just gonna go for it today. So let's go. So let's just start off by answering the question, why is anger so prominent in grief? And you might be like, Tara, duh, this is obvious. Like I alluded to earlier, right? There might be something just wrong with the circumstances of how something went down, or something felt out of our control, or whatever it is. Let's just set the stage here, right? Grief is more than just sadness. It is a complex, multidimensional experience. And anger, though often, for many of us, uncomfortable to express or even admit to, it is actually a very healthy part of the grieving process. And when I say that, I don't mean it's part of the 5 stages, which I've talked about this on the podcast before. The 5 stages of grief have been very misconstrued over the years. This is not a whole lecture on that. It was meant to be something entirely different. Maybe not entirely different, but it was meant to be something different than what society has come to know and accept of the 5 stages of grief. So let's just throw those out the window, because I know anger was one of them, right? But as I've joked about, and actually it's really not much of a joke, this is actually quite serious, we can experience the quote 5 stages of grief all in one morning, right? This is not proper stages that we go through. So I want to clarify that. I really want to give context around that. So I just mean, when I'm talking about anger here, just anger that we can feel even outside of our grief. Some of the things that we're going to talk about today are great for coping with just anger that we might feel around any given situation, and just honoring that emotion and holding space for it and everything. But definitely within grief, and I feel like this is also a lot in acute grief. I see this anger and people kind of holding on to this resentment much more early on. But listen, I've watched shows, I've come across people that are grieving a loss, a lot of the time a loss of a loved one because of something that was done to them, or I'm thinking a lot of my true crime shows that I indulge in, and just these horrific situations where justice either was or wasn't done. And it's so valid. It makes so much sense that people, whether or not they even mean to hold on to this anger. But let's quickly break down the reasons why anger shows up so strongly for us, especially in grief. Number one, it actually gives us a sense of control, whether or not we realize this is one of the things it's doing. It does. Because when everything feels chaotic and sort of upended, anger can feel like a powerful reclaiming of our voice. We can almost feel empowered in our anger. And it's like if we can express it in either a healthy or unhealthy way, there's something about that that's like, oh, this was done to me, this was done to them. Let me sit in that and let me have power and control over that anger, that feeling. So that is very, very common. Number two, it protects our vulnerability. Anger is often a mask for, not surprisingly, some deeper pain, fear, or despair. And when we go through a loss, we've almost never been more vulnerable than in that moment, right? So I think for many of us, anger can really, it's a major coping mechanism, no doubt. And it truly is one of those masks. It's a protective shield of sorts that, just keeps our very raw, vulnerable state from being like so open and out there for the world to see, for our friends, for our family, whatever. It really keeps, but this is where anger gets really tricky, right? In doing that and not letting it out and not expressing it properly and releasing it, it festers, it contracts us. And here on this podcast and myself as a coach, I'm all about expansion, right? And light and expression and getting all the BS out there and working through it. So in thinking that we are protecting ourselves and whatever weaknesses or vulnerabilities we have, we really are doing ourselves a disservice in terms of actually coping with it, right? And like, what value, like, truly think about this. What value is holding on to that anger and resentment adding to your life at the end of the day? Are you actually really in power with that? Or are you giving your power away to some circumstance that is out of your control, that you ultimately do not own? Because that really, when you are holding on to anger and resentment and frustration and all of that, that's really what you're doing. So as much as you feel like you're owning it, and there's so much ego that can come with anger, I think it's important to shine a very realistic light on what is really happening when we carry this anger with us. All right, number three, as I've alluded to already, it is a response to some injustice. And I don't just mean like justice in terms of the law and getting justice for something in that way. I just mean, let's talk about the death of a loved one for a moment. In that case, especially when it is sudden or traumatic, so much of that, rightfully so, feels very wrong. The world, the universe, God, whatever higher power, one way or another, has done us dirty, to say the least. So anger can arise when the reality of what is happening doesn't match the world that we thought or hoped that we lived in. And number four, it is tied to love. So simply put, this is so cliche. I almost didn't want to put this in here, but I have to, because with anger, there is love. The deeper the love, the deeper the pain. Why wouldn't we be angry about losing something that we loved, right? We wouldn't be so angry if we didn't love so deeply, right? But here's the thing that most people don't tell you, or at least society and everything doesn't really just come out and recognize. Anger isn't just a stage to move through. As I was saying earlier about these, quote, 5 stages of grief. Anger is a powerful signal. And when we listen to it without fear or shame, it can point us to actually really deep and really transformative healing. I know this because I have done the work myself in releasing anger, in releasing resentment, in taking my power back. It has quite literally changed my life. So, we're going to get into more of that, not even just my story, just how you can begin to tap into that as well. But really quick, as if I did not make this clear enough already, here is why it is really crucial to acknowledge our anger. When we avoid anger or judge ourselves for it, which is also very common, we suppress energy that wants to move. Anger, sadness, all of it, this is all energy. Please know that, like that we carry within the body. So it wants to expel itself, right? That anger, it doesn't, nothing about that is good to have in our body. And unacknowledged anger can become chronic resentment, depression, anxiety, physical illness, emotional numbness, and of course, even self harm or other destructive behaviors. Anger is a vital emotional compass. It tells us when boundaries have been crossed, when we need to speak up, or when something in our life system is not aligned. So, in recent years, let me tell you, I've gotten all into my own personal alignment and what that feels like. And because of the work that I have done to cope with any anger that I was feeling coming out of the deaths of my parents and understand why I was feeling those things and why that looked and felt the way that it did for me, the releasing of that and taking my power back on that, as I've mentioned a couple of times now, I am so much more in tune with my soul's purpose, hence the reason I do self purpose coaching and transformational life coaching. I am so much more on top of my grief, and I can feel when certain things are coming to the surface far better than I ever could before, so I can get ahead of it and cope with it properly. I can immediately feel when something does not feel right or aligned to me anymore. It becomes very obvious. So, like in our earlier, let's say earlier days of grief, the more acute grief, right? Like making decisions, trying to make sense of how we feel, trying to make sense of anything, or just having like a strong opinion on something can feel absolutely impossible and like 50 million miles away. If we are doing the correct work, the right grief work, the right soul work to cope with that, we become so beautifully, painfully in tune with what is in alignment of our highest, happiest, healthiest self. So we're going to get into a little bit of that today, but honestly, you guys, truly, like that is the work that I do with clients I have through like the little mini courses and things that I offer. Like it is all about that, and it's those little micro moments and it's those steps that we can take to get in alignment and to be able to better cope with big emotions like this, like anger, like resentment, like envy and jealousy and whatever else might come our way, whether it is something specific that we're coping with in our grief or just any thing that upsets us in life. Really, I was literally just having a conversation with someone, a podcast that I'm actually going to be on as a guest, which is kind of fun for once. And we were literally just talking about this because here's the thing, and you guys know this, life with grief, it's beyond just coping with our grief. There are daily stressors that we have to deal with. People that have maybe disappointed us or not lived up to certain expectations. Or maybe it's like things that we said or did that we're not proud of that we wish we could have done differently. And maybe the anger is actually not on someone else, but it's on us. And sometimes that's even worse because we are just berating ourselves for wishing we had done something differently. And oh my God, it is so easy to get stuck there. I want to say that one more time. If that has ever happened to you, if you're there right now, my friend, it makes so much sense. That's okay for the moment. But that's where we have to have this come to Jesus turning point moment with ourselves where we're like, oh my God, I don't want to live here anymore. Like I've had guests recently, these episodes haven't come out yet, but like they've been in a similar situation, whether it was anger or another big emotion they were feeling that was a darker, more negative one. And they were like, I was just so tired of feeling sick and tired. So I want to, pause and ask you here if anger is something that you are coping with. We have to become aware of that and ultimately kind of make a decision of like, how long do you plan on carrying this with you? These are tough questions that we have to ask ourselves, but they're important ones. And we're human, right? It's not like the anger is going to just miraculously go away and it's like, oh, okay, I've dealt with it. It's never going to happen again. That absolutely not. That is not how anger or grief or any of it works. So I am certainly not implying that. But, in grief, we often turn it inward, right? Why didn't I do more? Why wasn't I there? Insert your question here. Or we project it outward, maybe at doctors, at God, at the person who left us, at life itself, whatever this looks like for you. And I want to remind you, none of this makes you a bad person. It makes you a person in pain, right? So for me, with my parents' deaths and that experience, I'll keep this really brief. I'll just say with my mom, I harbored a lot of anger about a lot of things. I harbored anger, I'll be very, very honest, around her and not getting medical help sooner when she was having these issues with GERD, with her esophagus, basically, and keeping food, so I'm like, why didn't you go to the doctor sooner? She wasn't a big Western medicine girly. I've talked about that on the podcast here before. And so, with her cancer, it was caught too late. And so even my dad and I, like once she died, we were having those honest conversations and we were upset with her. We were like, oh, this all could have been prevented if you had just done this, if you had just done that. But again, it's like, how long am I supposed to live in that space, right? We have to, eventually, we got to let those things go. Not that those thoughts won't continue coming up, they will, but I didn't want to live upset and mad at my mom. She was already gone. I was already upset enough. So why am I going to waste my time being angry with her for not going to the doctor when guess what? It's tough love here, but like she died. She is dead. She's not coming back. My wallowing and my being angry with her and the universe or whoever for what I felt was like taking her from me, that's not adding value to my life. That's not going to bring her back. So I was upset with her. I was upset with myself that I didn't drag her to the doctor. I was upset definitely with certain doctors and nurses that I felt didn't treat her as well as I wish they had, or I wish had maybe taken a different direction with some of her care or whatever. With my dad, not so much around his medical care per se. Actually, I'll be honest with you, I didn't really have a lot of anger around my dad's passing. I think I was just very mad at whatever higher powers that be and life. And for me with my dad's death, because I had not made peace with it before he died, but like I could see his health decline coming after my mom died. And I was like, well, here we freaking go again. And I'm just like, that was more of a like anger around why me? Why are these my circumstances? Why my parents? This isn't fair. What did I do to deserve this? What did they do to deserve this? Just very, very self-involved thoughts, if I'm being very honest, but it's okay. We're human, right? But the goal is to acknowledge those. And with my dog's passing, I would be remiss if I didn't mention this. And I've talked about this a little bit on the podcast before. I'll be honest, I can feel my blood pressure start to rise anytime I talk about the circumstances around her death. But basically, even though she was, 18, she was 19 when she died, but as a geriatric dog, she had had some seizures here and there in the later years of her life, but nothing consistent. And the vet that we took her to, who was also responsible for giving us some of her medications, had told us, hey, she needs a rabies shot. Very, very long story short, didn't feel good about that intuitively. I didn't think she needed it. And I did actually push back originally, but they were like, no, well, we can't give her medications. It was almost like they held it over my head. And they were like, no, she needs this rabies shot. I was like, she's 19 years old. She doesn't need a freaking rabies shot. But I did not listen to my intuition in that moment, and I just went against it, I should say. And she had an adverse reaction to that shot, had seizure after seizure for 2 days, and was dead 2 days later. I don't think I've ever been so angry, probably over anything in my life, actually. I was you should have heard me on the phone with this vet, borderline threatening to sue him because of the negligence, and I just needed someone to blame for her death. And of course, they probably didn't know that it was going to cause those seizures. But, for me, I am someone that I am putting trust in this person caring for my dog. That trust essentially was betrayed because of what happened. And my thought is like, you should have known this as a doctor, right? You should have known that there was maybe something in this rabies shot that could have sparked this, these additional seizures within her. You're irresponsible. You're a horrifically horrible human being. And I held on to that for a very, very long time. I still do. Actually, if I'm being very honest, I'm still angry, but I'm almost more so if I'm being very honest, because again, this is a process of going inward. I'm very, very mad at myself for not listening because, my thought was like, well, if I had just listened to my gut, which I am much better about doing now, I've never gone against my gut since, right? This is a learning curve, learning experience from all of this. That's really where the source of a lot of the anger came from. So there's a lot of things around that. Just my journey of coping with anger. That amongst many other things. There's many other non-death related losses in my life where anger has been at the forefront, and I've no doubt that is the case for you as well. So how do we begin to move through this, right? And have a different mindset shift around our anger and come at it more from a place almost of empowerment, right? So a way to do this, a way to start doing this is flipping the narrative. So what we have to do is take some of the shame off of this emotion of anger and give it space to breathe, to be exactly what it is and honored as anger, as a very key, important, big emotion. So let's start walking through some of these mindset shifts here together. Number one, anger is not the enemy. It is the escort to your deepest unmet needs. I'm going to say that one more time. Anger is not the enemy. It is the escort to your deepest unmet needs. So ask yourself, what is my anger trying to protect? What does it want me to pay attention to? Again, grief and sitting in this anger and all of these deep feelings, there is no better time to do the self-reflection. So think about that. What is your anger trying to protect? And what does it want you to pay attention to? Because here's the thing, anger isn't coming up for you for no reason. So in addition to diffusing it and managing it in a healthy way, I encourage you to get curious about it. And please go more than just surface level here. So in using some of my examples, right? I was mentioning I was upset with some of the decisions my mom made. I was upset at myself for not pushing harder with my dog. I was upset that I took her to the vet against my better judgment. Okay, that's all fine, but that's very surface level. So when we have those thoughts and we're trying to do this reflection, we need to go a little bit deeper than that. And we need to continue asking ourselves, okay, but why? But why? But why? Number two, you're allowed to be angry at someone you love. I'm unofficially giving you permission to be angry at someone you love. Let's say it's a loved one here for you today. I am giving you some unsolicited permission to be angry at someone you love. Because here's the thing, just like grief and love can coexist, love and anger can actually coexist. It is possible to honor someone's memory, or even if it's a living loss, right? Maybe it's a breakup, it's a divorce or whatever. It's okay And it is possible to honor someone's memory and be furious that they are now gone, or that they left, or that they hurt you, or just wish that things had gone differently, that different choices were made, that different things had been said or done. It's all valid. And those two things can be held at the same time. So seriously, write that down if you need to. Write down that little mantra. Love and anger can coexist, and give yourself some much needed grace today. Number 3, anger is one of our most sacred, greatest teachers. Simply put, I mean, listen, grief and anger and all of this, it teaches us about a lot of things. But what I think is, I was about to say great, what I think is great about anger, what I think is unique about anger is that it teaches you boundaries, right? It teaches you values. It teaches you pain. It teaches you things you would or wouldn't do again. And so when I talk about kind of like taking our power back a little bit and giving ourselves grace and everything throughout this process, as I just mentioned, like with my dog's passing, for example, I just said, I've never not listened to my gut ever again. That is very accurate and very true for me. I knew in that moment what I probably should have done. I should have, would have, could have stood up for her more and not made the decision I did. But guess what? I trusted someone, even if that was on paper a good decision at the time. The circumstances did not turn out how I hoped. And ultimately, I guess I'm living with the consequences of that. And that's a horrendous feeling, right? When, and especially if we, and also this is for anyone here listening who maybe has had to take someone off of life support or had to make difficult decisions. We've definitely had people here guesting on the podcast that have had to make those difficult decisions. I mean, it's awful, some of the ways that we have to learn these lessons. It just is. But let me ask you this. What would happen if you approached your anger with curiosity instead of resistance? What if you just went from that state of contraction to just a little bit of breath, a little bit of expansion, a little bit of release? How would you feel? Even literally just doing that, as I just kind of like did, like I could feel that contraction. And even as I was talking about my dog, felt that contraction. And I dropped my shoulders. I literally released some of that. And I could already feel how good that made me feel. Something to think about. Number 4, anger doesn't need to be managed. It needs to be metabolized. So this might be a hot take. This could be controversial. I don't know. There's a part of me that certainly feel, anger management classes. Okay, yeah, that's a thing. I think we do need to learn to manage our anger, so to speak. But really, I think what this is emotional regulation, right? And our emotions need to be regulated. And anger especially needs to be metabolized. So, and here's the other thing. This is why I keep saying, I'm using contraction a lot today, but like with anger, you don't need to like control or suppress it. You need to move it through your body and process it so it doesn't stagnate. So hopefully you can kind of understand and hear the difference there. So you might be like, okay, Tara, that's kind of like synonymous, maybe manage, metabolize, okay, whatever. The point of me saying this is we don't want our grief, the anguish, envy, anger, any of these like bigger, kind of more negative, arguably, emotions to get stagnant in the body. And we're going to talk about some ways to kind of help move through that in a little bit. But remember that this is a really critical point here. Anger doesn't need to be managed as traditionally as we think. It needs to be metabolized. It needs to move. So you are not holding on to it. That's the whole point of this, right? So finally, let's start talking about some tangible and also some slightly more non-basic ways to cope with anger after loss, because I didn't just want this episode to be filled with fluff or like, take deep breaths and count to 10 or do a box breath. However, all of those things are very important and actually very valid. So I do recommend meditation. I do recommend breathing exercises. I do recommend, again, ways to breathe through it. That is actually very important. But here are just some, again, very tangible, hopefully very transformational ways to work through this anger and move it along. So, number one is name your anger with precision. So, for example, start a daily, for lack of a better term, anger journaling practice. So here's the thing. And again, my sort of theme today is going deep. It's getting curious. It's going deep with yourself. Instead of writing, I'm angry. I'm angry. I'm angry. I'm angry. I'm angry. And I'm angry. And just leaving it at that and living in that, define it more specifically. For example, I'm furious that the world has moved on. I'm enraged that they didn't take better care of themselves. I am so mad at the doctors who didn't listen. I am upset about the circumstances around their death. Whatever this looks like for you, however you define that. The power here comes from labeling it, because labeling it gives the anger a little bit of form, not power, form. And when it has that a little bit of a form to it, you can face it and cope with it properly because you know what you're up against, right? Anger can feel, it's a big emotion, right? It is all consuming. It can take over if we let it. So we would need to get curious about it, but we need to get into the specifics of like what specifically we're so angry about. To use my dog example again, I keep bringing her up today, but I was so angry at the world and I was so angry at this vet. I did not want to turn that mirror back on myself and be like, no, you messed up here too. You made the decision. See, I am even feeling this physically, you guys. Oh my God. Ultimately, I made the decision, and I can say all of this now because I've dealt with it pretty much. I made the decision to get her that shot against what was my better judgment at the time. But I didn't want to face that. I didn't want to admit to that. My ego didn't want to admit that. So I held that anger longer than I should have. I held it in the wrong place. And it wasn't until I had to have that difficult conversation with myself and take some responsibility that I was finally able to be like, I was only doing what I thought was best at the time. I thought I was helping her against rabies, right? Here I am trying to be a good dog mom. Essentially, what I felt like I got punished for it. How is that fair? It's not fair. It's not fair because life isn't fair. Death isn't fair. Circumstances around any loss that we go through can be very unfair. That is life. That is life. That is loss. They are intertwined. With one, there is the other. That's it. But it requires that self-reflection and going inward and having those brutal, tough love conversations with ourselves. But that's when it's like we can start breaking it down. We can start breaking the walls down, that armor I mentioned that we can sometimes have up as we're experiencing grief and this anger. When we start to chip away at that and that can come down, yeah, it freaking hurts. Yeah, there's a lot of vulnerability that comes out in that. But oh my gosh, the release, the emotional release we can feel when that happens, when it starts to happen, it saves us, you guys. It saves us from a life of prolonged grief, which can, as I mentioned, lead to some pretty severe side effects and health effects. It's not meant to be held on to in the way that some people hold on to it. So we do need to have those honest conversations with ourselves. And when we do that, and when we open ourselves up to that internal dialogue, or doing this with a coach like myself or a therapist or whoever it is, and we label it as I I can now bring it back to my original little exercise here of labeling our anger with more precision. There we are. We can cope with it. We can face it properly and with a little power behind it. All right, number 2, create a little sacred anger ritual. Set aside space to feel your anger fully. Light a candle, put a song on that resonates with whatever emotion you are feeling. Maybe you go on a drive and you listen to that song and you literally just freaking scream in your car. I've done it. I've done the screaming, I've done the crying, I've done it all. Scream into a pillow, go to a rage room, right? Like, you are an individual. You know, or I'm inviting you to figure out how it works best for you to release those emotions and that anger and that pent up energy. Let your body release what your mind is holding. But always be sure to ask yourself with compassion and patience where the anger is coming from, knowing that this might change a little bit each day too, because this is a process, remember, okay? Number 3, use transformational letter writing. So you've probably heard of this method before, certainly didn't make this up. Write letters to the person who died, the system that failed you, God or the universe, whoever you feel like you need to take issue with. Maybe it's even yourself. And write a letter, write it out. Maybe even speak it out in a voice note on your phone. The letters aren't for mailing, they are for releasing. Perhaps burn them safely, bury them, read them aloud, and then maybe rip it up and throw it out, whatever feels good to you. Let your words purge the pain. Let it come out through some creative medium. And that actually leads me into my 4th point perfectly. Channel your anger into creation. Paint it, sculpt it, dance it, build a memorial, start a movement, right? Anger, when transmuted, actually becomes this insanely amazing creative fire. I empower you to tap into this fire. Explore that flame that is burning inside of you from this anger and channel it into something that will add value to your life, so much so that you won't even know what to do with yourself. And in saying that, know that the anger can and will linger, and that's okay. It's not that we're going to completely eradicate it or that is even the goal. Let's be realistic and let's be really gentle with ourselves, right? It's not going to go away overnight, especially depending on our circumstances. Maybe it won't ever. And there are definitely some situations and circumstances out there where, truthfully, I can understand the lifelong anger. I really can. But then we have to, again, look inward and really be honest and really ask ourselves, okay, what's the scale here? What's the anger scale? How much am I going to allow this anger and the circumstances around whatever I'm upset about to control my life? Or am I going to take that power back into my hands and I'm going to tell it who's boss, right? But what we are trying to do, like I've said earlier, is take our power back so the anger doesn't fester and live within us, because that benefits no one. It certainly doesn't benefit ourselves. And what if we have a family? What if we have friends? What if we have these people around us where we, again, as I was saying in the beginning, don't want to live in anger, but it's like we don't know what else to do with it. It's stagnant, it's stuck. But let me remind you, again, we don't want that anger to fester and live within us, because guess what? It doesn't deserve our power and energy. You deserve your power and energy, the good, the light, the love in the world. That's what you need to feed into. Putting that power back in our own hands is the most transformative and beneficial thing that we can do for ourselves and those around us. And if you want to think about it as a way to better honor your loved one who has died, if that feels good for you, there's that too. I never want to impose what you should or shouldn't do to honor a loved one, or put words in your loved one's mouth. They're like, oh, they wouldn't want you to be angry or whatever. Let me tell you this. I know my parents and my sweet little dog would not want me to be angry. There is too much light and love and elation and beautiful energy where they are now. I truly believe that. I believe that of your loved ones too, if you have lost one. And there's no room for anger. So we have a choice in how much room we let our anger take up. That is entirely within your hands. So I want you to remember that. All right, last few here. Number 5, work with some somatic therapies. Again, theme of today, mind body connection. Your body remembers the trauma of shock and loss. So, if you haven't tried some of these already, maybe consider trying TRE, tension and trauma releasing exercises, somatic experiences, ecstatic dance, martial arts. The list goes on, but these are all practices that their kind of commonality is it helps your nervous system address the stress cycle that anger is a part of, right? We want to like disrupt that somehow. So these types of exercises can be really, really beneficial. And again, move that anger through you and out ultimately. And number 6, as I mentioned in the beginning, reclaim your voice in a healthy way, right? Like I was saying, I think a lot of us anger feels like we're doing that, but I think anger is often also kind of conversely tied to feeling silenced, or we maybe don't even know how to express ourselves or our anger or exactly what we're feeling. So I empower you today, find a way to express your anger or just things that you couldn't say before. Think of this as a reset and feel this out. What is this? What feels good to you now? So maybe speak it out and use your voice. Maybe you start a podcast like I did. I didn't start this out of anger, but let me tell you, it has been such a cathartic experience being able to talk this out with all of you and with guests. You never know how beneficial it could be. But also, talking perhaps again to a professional, a grief coach like myself, a therapist, someone who can hear you and hold that space for you and kind of bounce ideas off of things with you. You could also start a blog. So maybe like the speaking part isn't really resonating with you, but it's just writing it out. And whether you even share the blog with anybody, maybe it's journaling, maybe it's writing in some other form, or as I mentioned, doing something creatively to again move it through you, get it out, get it moving. Also, telling your story in a group setting. So, whether that is a grief group or, again, just a community, a group of people who, they might not understand exactly what you've been through, but perhaps they've lost a loved one as well. That community component, I cannot stress it enough. It is, I am of the belief that it is critical to go inward and it's a really sacred an empowering thing that we get to do after we go through a loss to get to know ourselves again and have these really deep, amazing conversations with us and us. But I also think that needs to be balanced with the right level of community as well, because there is a difference between isolation and solitude. So, something to keep in mind, right? You deserve to be heard, even if it's messy, even if it's loud, even if it sounds like it is complaining or venting or whatever it is. I assure you, others have had similar thoughts and feelings similar to what you are, and you are not as alone as you think. Because I truly remember, I mean, I felt alone because the lack of my parents' presence in my life, but I really did isolate. Almost sometimes not in a great way because I was like, no one's going to understand my pain, my anger, all of these things that I'm dealing with. And that's just simply not true. People can at least begin to understand. And I can tell you from personal experience that finding my voice and how to cope with my grief and my anger and all of this properly and finding those healthy ways to express myself and how I was feeling has been transformative. It has also helped me make sense of my emotions and process them in a healthier way, knowing that what works for me might not work for someone else. And that's okay, right? We're all individuals, but I also want to just remind you and validate you here for a second. You don't have to forgive right now or ever, but there is something to be said about the releasing and extracting of that anger so it no longer has control of your life. Let's say there was a circumstance around a death that, for lack of a better term, was at the hands of someone else, right? It makes complete and utter sense to me personally, also as a grief coach, that one would hold on to anger for that situation and for the person who caused that death, let's say. But also think of it this way. Haven't they taken enough from you, right? If that death of your loved one was at the hands of a situation, of an individual, whatever, they have taken enough from you. They do not deserve the power to take your voice and your joy and your life, essentially, from you. And that is a balance. And I am not saying anyone here listening who that applies to needs to get there right away. I could even understand how this might be offensive, depending on where you're at in your grieving experience. And I get that. But I'm going to also just repeat myself one more time. That love and that anger, those two things can coexist. Sometimes underneath the anger is a part of you that just wants to be seen and held and told it wasn't your fault. You did the best you could, and you are allowed to feel this and still be a good person. So give that compassion to yourself. You don't need to rush the process. You just need to be real with where you are and just be honest with yourself about that, and be honest about that to other people around you as well. And just be very open with what you're feeling and how you're coping with it, or how you're at least trying, right? And reflect on where you were when you felt wronged. And also give yourself some credit for how far you've come, and know that you are going to go even further with this. And that process and that healing journey is entirely within your hands. And that is one of the most sacred human experiences that we can have. So just some closing words here, friendly little reminders as you leave this episode today. Anger, of course, is a very natural part of grief. And like all emotions, it is an invitation. It is an invitation to feel, to heal, and to reclaim parts of yourself that got lost in the storm, in the chaos of whatever loss or losses you have been through. So today, if your grief feels like and looks like rage, let it, embrace that storm, right? You're not doing it wrong. You are grieving. And that is a form of your grief coming to the surface, but it needs to then be processed, right? We can't just allow it to come to the surface and then push it back down. That is just doing our grief and this entire process such a disservice. And then at the end of the day, you're doing yourself a disservice as well, right? So when you feel that anger bubbling up and it's coming to the surface, and listen, there maybe are some times where you're at work or you're somewhere and you can't exactly let it out. That's okay. Hopefully some of the things that I laid out in this episode today are things that you can practice in the privacy of your own home, or when you do have an alone moment. The point is that you are paying attention and you are giving it the time and the care and the attention that it deserves. All right, my friend, I know anger is heavy. Let me just take a little breath on that one. But thank you for listening today. Again, this is a big topic. I hope I at least began to cover it, scratched some of the surface, and helped you through this a little bit today. If this episode resonated, I would so appreciate it if you shared it with someone else who might be holding that heavy fire in their heart, that anger within their body, who might need to hear this. And if you are craving or looking for deeper support, my grief and transformational life coaching practice is always open to you. The link for all of that and all of my little mini courses are in the show notes. Until next time, as always, be gentle with your heart and with yourself, because my friend, you are grieving and you are going through some difficult stuff right now. And that deserves to be held and witnessed and acknowledged. And remember, even your anger is sacred. Okay? All right. Lots of love to you today, and I'll see you in the next episode. I am sending you a huge thank you for